Welcome to Adversity to Ascension, a podcast about taking the adversity in your life and turning it into meaning. And today we are really honored to welcome Robbie Parker. Robbie is the father of Emily Parker, a 6-year-old child who, among 20 others, lost her life at the school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14th, 2012. Robbie works as a physician's assistant at the Oregon Health Science University and has spent his professional career supporting child health and safety. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree at Weber University and his Master's of Science at Pacific University. Robbie currently calls the Pacific Northwest his home, along with his wife, Alyssa, and his daughters, Madeline and Samantha. Robbie, welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's so good to finally meet you and get to talk and chat and connect.
Yes, thank you. So, Robbie, I finished your book last night and I went back over it today. And I have to say that it's one of the most emotional experiences I've had, even in 30 years of being a psychiatrist. I've heard a lot of stories throughout my 30 years of practice. And this one was a tough one. But I want to thank you for writing the book and sharing it with all of us.
That's very special of you to say. Thank you so much. Hearing you respond that way really just exemplifies why I went about even putting this out into the world. It wasn't something I sought to do, but I really just wanted to be able to connect with people on things that are real and things that are tough. And so thank you for those kind words.
This whole experience, I know that it must be tough for you reliving it through interviews. So I want to thank you for that and this opportunity to talk to you. I wonder if you could start us out by telling us about your beautiful Emily.
Oh, of course. No, that's one funny thing about grief is people feel like you don't want to talk about the person that you lost. And especially when you lose a child, you love talking about your kids. So yeah, let's talk about Emily for a minute. So let me share a memory of hers that kind of exemplifies who she was as a person that, it's not in the book or anything. But so there was this moment where we were living in Connecticut. There was this huge snowstorm and, it finally stopped snowing like late afternoon. So I went out to clear our walks, and our driveway was this big hill and it was just monstrous and I hated it, but I needed to get it done because I was leaving early for work the next morning and all that kind of stuff. So I was out there for hours and I missed dinner, I missed bedtime, and I came into the house through the kitchen and the light above our dining room table was on and there was a plate of food and my favorite drink on the table. And it was obvious that this is the work of Emily. Emily had set this all up. And it was just so sweet. And I was just so touched by that. But I didn't find out till later that nobody else knew about it. She had actually been tucked into bed. She realized that I hadn't eaten dinner. So she got up on her own and went and warmed up a plate in this hodgepodge kind of way. And only the things that she liked were on the plate.
Oh my goodness.
And she had a soda that I would always have with dinner and stuff like that. And when people talk about like, what is it that you miss about Emily? And that's what I miss about Emily was she was so tapped into her emotions, even at 6 years old. And she knew how to communicate it and she knew how to express it with other people.
Yes.
And that kind of realness is what I miss about her the most, because that's something at 43 years old I struggle with. I struggle knowing how to articulate my emotions, knowing what it is that I'm feeling and how to process those things. And she was always in tune with herself and who she was and how she expressed herself to the world. And so that's what I miss about her. That's what I remember about her.
Yes. And I remember in the book you talking about, she was always thinking about other people too. And you talked about the box of gifts that she had gathered. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So she had watched this thing and where she learned about the real Saint Nicholas. And I don't know, this was around Christmas time. She was killed just 11 days before Christmas, and so she got it in her mind that she wanted to do this toy donation drive. This was all on her own. Like, she came walking out of her room. She walked by Alyssa, my wife Alyssa, who was sitting on the couch. She went out in the garage. Emily grabs this box that she found. She comes back in, and Alyssa's just looking at this like, okay, she's up to something again. And this was like unannounced. She just did this on her own. And what was really a fun part of the story is when she went to recruit her sisters. So my middle daughter, Madeline, was kind of indifferent to the idea of giving up some toys or whatever and put them in the box. But Samantha was I guess at 3 years old, a 6-year-old trying to describe to a 3-year-old what philanthropy is was just a really complicated concept. And she just got this really stubborn no. And Emily tried to explain it. And then she bartered with her. And then she finally just landed on, I'll give you some coins from my piggy bank if you give me some toys from your toy box.
Oh, that's great.
And so they struck up this deal. And it just brought such a fun energy into the house. And so the box was finally filled in Samantha's room. And then Emily quickly got some of her artwork. She was a fabulous artist, and she ran downstairs, and when she put her artwork in the box, then it was complete. And so the box sat in Samantha's room, and we were set to donate that on the last day of school before Christmas break. They were going to take the box to this donation center that Emily had picked out. So that's, again, just another fabulous example of who Emily was at 6 years old.
That she would just think about that on her own and devise that plan, and then figure out how to convince Samantha.
Yeah. And it turned into this whole family thing, right? And it none of that came from Alyssa and I. That was not anything that was on our radar at all.
It's amazing. Yeah. Well, so going from that to that day, that terrible day, take us through that day a little bit, please.
Sure. You always hear the story of like, it just started out kind of like any other day, right? And so some of the things that I remember about how that day started, though, so Emily, she was a notorious like early riser. And so we kind of joked around that like, just so that we could sleep in sometimes, we taught her how to tell time specifically, so we could like put a rule in like, don't come out of your room till 7 o'clock. Right. And so I had gotten up early. I was walking by Emily's room, and I saw that she was awake. And so I poked my head in, and sorry if I go on another story, if you don't mind, but like, so absolutely. I lived for a couple of years in Brazil. And so I had learned to speak Portuguese, and in Connecticut where we lived, there's a big Brazilian population there. And so Emily heard me speaking Portuguese to people once at like Costco, and she had this like, wait. So there's people that I can't talk to because I don't know their language. She's like, well, we got to fix this. So she like demanded that I teach her Portuguese so that when we were out and about, she could talk to anybody she wanted to, basically. Right. And so, so I poked my head in, and she looks at her clock, and she looks at me, and she starts out with this like, bom dia, como está? And so we had this little conversation in Portuguese, and I didn't get that moment with her before I went to work all the time. And so just had that moment, gave her a hug and a kiss, told her she could go up and snuggle up with Alyssa before they got ready for school. I quickly got ready for work. And when I came out, everybody was in Samantha's room, kind of playing and just kind of getting the day started. And the box and the family and the energy that was in our house that morning was just, it was like, this is what you live for, right? Like, this is why you start a family. This is why we did all that sacrifice of
that's the
school
family.
And work. Yeah. And so I make it to work. I'm in the hospital. I work in the newborn intensive care unit. I'm starting to round on my patients. I get a phone call, and they leave a voicemail. And that was the first time I heard that there was a shooting at one of the Newtown schools. Alyssa was out and about. She had dropped Madeline off at preschool. Emily had already gotten on the bus and was already at school at that point. And so it was kind of one of those panic moments, but you didn't really know exactly how to respond. I quickly just thought like this was something that happened at like the high school or something. But pretty quickly we find out that the shooting was at the elementary school, and I'm at the hospital. The hospital gets put in a lockdown. I had heard that there was students that had been injured that were going to come to the hospital, so I was kind of thought where I needed to be. Alyssa was trying to get information. We're trying to communicate, and it's just chaotic. Eventually, I make it to the firehouse. There was a fire station down the street from the school, and at the firehouse is where they were doing this reunification process. And Alyssa and I sat there. By the time I got there, it had been a couple hours after the shooting, after we had first heard about it. I get in there, and the room is just very, very tense. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of people.
I would imagine, yes.
And the only thing that they had been told before I got there was, we can confirm that there was 20 children that died. But we can't give out any more information because we're still trying to count for everybody. Mm-hmm. So everybody's in this room is just wondering, it's weird to feel that sensation of hope being a scary thing.
Right.
And that's the best way I can describe it. Was you always look at hope as being this like positive, uplifting thing, and in that moment, it was scary. You didn't know how much to trust hope. And so it took a couple more hours before they finally were able to come in and confirm that if we were parents and we were in that room, that was because that our child had been killed.
And that was basically confirmed by the governor. Is that correct?
Right. Eventually, so this somebody from the state police had been coming in, giving us updates, but all of his updates were, I don't have any more information. We'll be back in an hour. I don't have any information. We'll be back in an hour.
Right.
And every minute that passed, just the tension in that room just got thicker and thicker and thicker. Mm-hmm. And the governor came in, which is kind of confusing to me. I didn't know why the governor would need to address, like, you're not living in a proper sense of reality at this moment.
Right.
And he started talking as if it was as if he wasn't updated, that we hadn't been updated.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
didn't know.
Yeah,
that you didn't know.
Yeah, and he was in an impossible. Even if all that was there, I mean, it's an impossible position to be in. And he was the one that broke the news to us that our kids had been killed.
Describe that moment.
There was this sense of hope, right? You're still holding on to it. It felt like a betrayal to your child if you were to give up hope. And I felt like there was just like this flicker, just like this one candle. Right. That was in the room, and it felt like all of us were just kind of just hovered around this candle, just trying to feel some of that warmth and some of that glow and some of that light. Mm-hmm. And when he uttered those words, it was like somebody just blew that candle out, and that hope just kind of just dissipated away, just like smoke coming off. And there was no hope, there was no light, there was no warmth, there was no glow. And Alyssa and I immediately just felt like we needed to leave. And so there wasn't anything left for us. The police had already gotten our contact information. We just needed to get home. Somebody was with our two daughters, Madeline and Samantha, at our house, and we just wanted to get home. And so we bolted out of the firehouse pretty quickly, unaware of what really was going on out in the world. And
right.
We meet this wall of photographers and reporters, and these cameras in our face, and they're click, 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 click. And just felt so intrusive and invasive. Yes. And this sweet fireman, this like young guy, he got in front of us and he starts pushing people out of the way. He starts yelling at them to move.
Thank goodness.
And just have such a soft spot in my heart for this person. I don't know who he was. I've never been able to figure out who he was. But he made it so that Alyssa and I could make it to our cars, and we could get home and be with our girls.
Right. And then in thinking ahead, putting myself in your shoes as much as possible, which is really impossible, but knowing that you're going home to your two remaining children who are younger, they were 4.5 and 3.5, correct?
Yeah. Madeline was almost 5. Her birthday's in January. So she was 4, and Madeline and Samantha was 3.5. Yeah.
And then because parents always want to protect their children no matter what. And so you're walking in to be with them. And I can imagine that you're wanting to protect their young psyches and hearts from your own grief and shock. How did you manage that?
It's a really hard question. I don't, I mean, I know what we did, but I don't know how well we managed it, right? So like, I mean, you're sitting down and you're looking at this 4 and 3-year-old. They knew something serious was up, right? I mean, they knew that we had been scared. They were at the firehouse for a little while before a neighbor of ours took them home.
I see.
And then my brother was able to go home and be with them. So we did our best to just try and explain that we were at the school because somebody had gone into the school and they wanted to hurt. This person had a desire to hurt a lot of people, and that Emily was hurt, and to the point where she was killed. I think how we kind of described it in 4-year-old language, and just try to help them understand that Emily wasn't going to be coming back, and we weren't going to see Emily again. I don't know how well that landed. I don't know how well they absorbed it. I know vaguely remember how it felt trying to explain that to them.
I can't imagine.
There, it was the fact of having to. Alyssa and I both come from kind of big families. There's 5 siblings and stuff like that. And so us having to then leave each other for a period of time to start making phone calls.
Calling.
Yeah, I didn't want anybody to hear about it. Anybody that I loved and cared about, I didn't want them to, hear it third hand. So I made sure that I called all my siblings. I called my mom and dad, and I wanted to be the one that broke the news to them for whatever reason. I don't know what it was about where my mental space was at, but that was important to me.
Well, yes, I can imagine that it would be. You would naturally want it to come from you first. So then there was a point in time then, I can't remember how many days afterward, when the families were asked to come to the high school, and you were going to be greeted by President Obama, who was the president at the time. And I remember you talking about how struck you were by his empathy and compassion.
Yeah. So that was on Sunday evening. So the shooting happened on a Friday morning, and by Sunday evening, this whole thing had been arranged. And I think one of the most touching things about, and he's on the record in his books and in interviews, him and his wife Michelle have both talked about how that was the hardest day of his presidency, their presidency. And the reason that he can say that from my perspective is there was a moment. So he didn't just come and visit the families. We weren't all together. They put us in these different rooms. And so he wanted to spend time with each individual family one-on-one.
Right.
And so it would have been a lot easier. It would have been very hard, but a lot easier for him to address all of us or to talk to all of us or
at the
whatever.
Same time. Right.
Yeah. Give some pep talk, hugs, or whatever he wanted to do. Right. And so there was this moment, we had little kids. And so one of them, of course, had to use the bathroom while we're waiting for, all of this going down. And we were ushered out into the hall by Secret Service, and I saw President Obama a few doors down.
Yes.
And he was talking, and I could see and I could feel what he was like preparing himself for. I don't know what room he had just came out of. I don't know what discussion he had just had. And he was having to try and regroup and get information about the next family he was going to go talk to and then go in. And so I got that just glimpse of what he was going through over and over and over. And so when it was time for him to come into our room, I was shocked by kind of how tall he was. And he wasn't, there was nothing about this that was political. He was in an office where he felt like this was something he needed to do. But the only thing I felt from him was, I'm a dad and I have daughters, and you're a dad and you have daughters, and I want to support you. And and that's what it felt like. And he was lovely with the kids, and he showed a lot of the funny thing is, of course, like, I was really young at the time. So he walked in and he actually started to go over to talk to my dad, and somebody had to like usher him to like, no, this is actually the father. Cause I still looked like I was like 14 at the time. But yeah, so we had a very just private, intimate moment between him and Alyssa and me. And but it was just real. And I just can't talk about how much it didn't care. Like, the election was the month before. He didn't care if I voted for him or if I didn't.
Right.
There was no political points to score here. He just really wanted to connect with another dad who he knew was hurting.
He was there as a human being.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember you saying in the book about how that night, as you were tucking your two little ones into bed, you were thinking that he was probably doing the same in his home. Right.
Like, this like concept of like fatherhood in that moment was really strong for me because, as parents, we make these promises to our kids, like, I'm never going to let anything happen to you. Right.
Right.
Never going to let anybody hurt you.
Right.
And so something like this happens and you realize, like, I can't be, like, I wasn't what I promised. And so and when trauma hits you, and I grew up in a very like shame-based culture. And so I just carried a lot of shame. Like, I failed. I let her down. Like, I didn't know what kind of dad I was anymore. I had this concept of who I was as a father before, and this shook everything in my world. And I was really struggling to even understand how I fit into this role of fatherhood, right, in that moment. But that experience with him really kind of brought that back to me. I think he was showing that, giving me an idea of like what a real leader, right, does. Yes. And he leads with his heart. And yeah, so like I tucked Samantha into bed that night and actually just laid down with her for a little bit. And I did have this like kind of envisionment of him coming back home and talking to his girls and making sure that they were safe, and so that was just and I never got a chance to like share that with him or anything like that. But if I ever get to see him again, that's definitely something I want to thank him for.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things about being a parent is recognizing that we can't keep them completely safe, that the world comes into our homes via media and everything else. We can't keep them safe no matter how hard we try, and we can only do the best that we can and instill in them the strength and wisdom to keep themselves safe as they grow up too.
Totally. Yeah, we don't have nearly as much control over over anything about being a parent as we might think we do sometimes.
No, we don't. So you spoke about the moment you walked out of the firehouse, you were accosted by media. And at that moment, nearly, was when Alex Jones began creating his narrative.
Right.
Unbeknownst to you.
Yeah, it wasn't like I didn't know who Alex Jones was. I don't know how many of your listeners might even really understand who Alex Jones is. But yeah, I mean, at the time in 2012, he was kind of like this fringe conspiracy theorist. He had made videos about 9/11 being an inside job and government conspiracies around like the Waco standoff and shooting and all that kind of stuff. He had a radio program that was syndicated across the country.
Infowars, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, if you subscribe to that kind of thought pattern or you liked, to listen to those kinds of things, he was a very popular guy in that realm.
Yeah.
And right now it's hard to imagine like and I have to remind myself too, back in 2012, you had internet had been out for a long time, social media is coming on board. There was a lot of ways that his message could be proliferated in a way that up until that point really wasn't possible. And so, and he was starting to grow in popularity. And this event, he jumped on pretty quickly to spread these conspiratorial narratives about how he viewed the Sandy Hook shooting and how much of he viewed it as a threat, and he viewed it as something that the American people needed to prepare themselves to fight against, and he needed a target to point at for his people to go after.
Right. So. Before you were even aware of him, the media was already making a nuisance of themselves, really bothering you, reaching out to family members and friends, and sort of in your face all the time. You said your landline was ringing constantly. And you didn't even know what your own landline phone number was at the time.
No,
right?
It was like for emergencies only. Right. But yeah, like, and it's kind of weird, like and this is really hard part about trying to explain this in a book, or even now with you, like, you have the shooting is like this like huge volcano just erupting, right? Everything in your life now just is like just blown, and and then to have immediately this like hurricane come in and start, and it feels like I was dealing with all these different things, big catastrophic things all at once. You have grief of losing your daughter, the shock and the trauma of that. You're immediately getting inundated by just regular media wanting they're out there trying to figure out any information they can to try and report on anything, and they're hounding you. And then on the fringes, you have somebody like Alex Jones doing what he was doing, and all of this was happening simultaneously immediately after the shooting. You had people that night ringing my phone, calling landlines, contacting my friends. From the media, you have Alex Jones already telling people I hadn't even been notified that Emily was killed. I didn't even know that Emily was a victim, and Alex Jones was on his show.
It's already on there.
Yeah, and he has millions of listeners, and he was telling them that this is fake, that this is, how did he want to word it? This was a false flag event to try and take away your guns. And,
right.
And so there's just a lot of turmoil going on just inside of me, and then unbeknownst to me, all around me.
Right. Yeah. So from the moment you learned that your daughter was not going to be coming home, your grief process was interrupted from that moment.
Right.
You didn't get to have that grieving period. Tell us about how you came to the conclusion that you wanted to make a public statement. And I mean, it made sense to me when I read it. I would have thought, I'm sure, the same thing that you thought.
Yeah, I mean, and not everybody probably would have felt like they needed to do something like that. But because of all the media attention, and so I wasn't aware of Alex Jones in the first 24 hours after the shooting. But like I said, that evening, people were calling. They were coming to our front door. So we were already getting inundated. And by Saturday morning, so not even 24 hours after the shooting, let alone when we found out and all of that, friends of mine were posting on social media about the fact that, we had lost Emily and stuff. So the media was able to kind of triangulate and pinpoint people who knew us. So they were getting hounded. And it just felt like all I wanted to do was focus on Emily. I wanted to focus on figuring out logistics of a funeral and all this kind of stuff. And I couldn't, because so much of my time and effort and focus was being siphoned away and intercepted by this stuff. So I thought that the best thing to do would be to agree to give a public statement. And my friend back in Utah, where we were from, had talked to a reporter. And I just wanted to give a message to the people back in Utah. That's where most of our family and stuff was from. It's just like, just wanted to give them an update on what was going on, because I wasn't talking to anybody. And so I thought, I'll have a reporter come, I'll meet this. They can record a statement that I'm going to give. They can send it back to Utah and they can air it. Because again, I'm totally unaware of, I'm aware that this is a big deal in the country, but I have
Right.
no concept of what that really means.
Right.
And so that was the plan. I was just going to give a statement. I wanted to show the world who Emily was. I wanted to let people know how we were feeling. And what I told my family was, if we give the media a bone to chew on, then maybe they'll leave us alone. And
Right.
that was my goal.
I probably would have had the same thought process. It makes sense, but the media is not like that. They're never really satiated with what they can get. So
yeah, they're like a pack of feral dogs and baby birds.
Yes.
They like go after you, and
Right.
then they never stop asking for more. Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
again, like Emily, this is all so much to process. Emily died Friday morning and Saturday evening. So like, at 6:00, I'm giving this statement because I feel like that's what I have to do so that I can
Right,
give my family
right.
some peace. And so, yeah.
And during that statement, I believe you gave a smile at some point. Is that correct?
Yeah. So again, I'm kind of a storyteller. So if I'm going on and on, just bear with
It's
me.
fine.
But like,
No, we want to hear.
yeah. So like I told this, I just said, have this one reporter, just have him meet us at the church. And I talked to the church to whatever. So I get to the church, I go inside. Nobody was there at the time. I just this was the first time I had a moment to myself just to kind of just be with my own thoughts and try and go over like what it was I actually wanted to say. I had family flying in, and so I was waiting till like some of my family members got there. By the time I made it out to the parking lot, it had gotten dark. There were these bright lights that were out there, and they were shining on me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. Nobody had talked to me. Like, we didn't plan anything out. So I was waiting for the one reporter to come up to me and explain kind of what to do. And I'm just nervous. And I just had this thing, like, you'll probably see it in the podcast. Like, I'll smile and I grin if I get nervous. I'm a gregarious kind of guy. Like, I don't know. And so like, and I'm just really confused why nobody's talking to me or telling me what to do. I need to know what to kind of expect.
Right.
And so my dad, I see a podium. So I'm like, do I just go to the podium? Like, do I go to the podium? And I kind of smirk. And then my dad gave this like stupid dad joke. He called me by a nickname. He was like, go get him, Augie. And so that made me kind of chuckle. And so that was, and I didn't, so what the reality of what was going on was every news station pretty much in the Northern Hemisphere was there. They were broadcasting this live, which I didn't know. I thought it was going to be recorded and sent back someplace.
Right.
So I didn't know I was on the air. I didn't know what was going on. And I had this moment of being nervous and dealing with my dad, smiling and kind of laughing just as a way to kind of calm myself down before I walked up to this podium and just started talking.
That was the moment that was caught and used by Alex Jones as an indication that this was all a hoax. The fact that you gave a little smile.
Right. So that was the match that he needed to ignite this powder keg that he had been stoking for years and years and years to his listeners. His listeners were primed to be ready to defend themselves against the government or people who wanted to come and take away your rights and all these things that he talks about. And this event, and then me in particular, that was the match that he needed. And so, I just actually want to thank you for saying, like, you would have maybe responded in a similar way that I did, because all I heard for years and years was, why would a dad want to go talk to the media? His daughter was just killed. That doesn't make any sense. And then he's up there laughing and getting into character. One of the things that means is, so Alex Jones, he said that me and the Sandy Hook families, we were all crisis actors. And a lot of people don't understand that. Like, that sounds like I'm like part of an improv group or something, but it means to that world, in that vernacular, is these are people who are working with the government and they're in cahoots with Obama and they want to take away your guns. And so they stage these tragedies and they need to hire these, and they have crisis actors to play these roles. So in their world, a crisis actor is someone that is against you. It's always an us versus them. So in that moment, I I unwittingly, I didn't know any of this was going on, but I walked in and I became the target. All of a sudden,
Right.
the outwardly
Right.
they that they always talk about became Robbie.
Right. Well, and I think that there are many public figures who have gone through similar situations where they've been accused of some sort of nefarious intent when they actually were just trying to sort of get everyone to back off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Like you said, it's a very human emotion. And
Right.
I love Dr. Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior.
Right.
And so,
Exactly.
yeah.
You don't know how you're going to react to something that catastrophic, that outside of the realm of normal human experience. You don't know how you're going to react to it until you're in it. And so for anyone to judge someone who's going through that is really doing them a disservice. At that point, then you're trying to just get through your days.
Mm-hmm.
And you spoke in your book of how you eventually had to make the decision to go back to work. Kind of fill us in on the time in between the interview that you gave or the media interview that you gave, and then going back to work. What was going on in your household and in your hearts during that time?
Yeah, there's a lot of dichotomy happening. On one hand, I unwittingly was put myself out there, and so a lot of people became familiar with who we were and who our family was. And it's not like we were the only ones. There was 20 families going through very similar things,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But so on one hand, you're receiving a tremendous amount of outpouring of love and support, and strangers wanting to send you things, people recognizing you, wanting to give me hugs in the street. Like, it's on that aspect, it's something I'll never saw before, I'll never see again. I've never felt such pure just love and condolences, and people just opening up their hearts to you, right? And you didn't know them, they didn't know you, but it didn't matter. Like and that was very powerful and very real.
Yes.
And just as equally in my world anyway, because of what Alex Jones saw, and he took that that 4-second clip and he played it over and over and over on his show, and spent hours talking about me and Sandy Hook and all these, what was wrong with it and all these kinds of things. So on the other hand, like I said, I became a target for people. And so I'm getting all this love on one hand, and then on the other hand, I'm getting the most vile hate, threats. That interview, that press conference was on Saturday night. By Monday morning, I received my first death threat.
Oh my God.
People had gotten on, my friends started this memorial page for Emily on Facebook.
Right.
And that thing just got inundated with so much just
horrible comments.
Yeah, there's not even like the proper number of adjectives that could describe exactly how horrible.
How vile, just vile.
Yeah, absolutely. So dealing with all of these things at the same time, just amongst what was going on inside of me and all this outside pressure, was just insane. So after about 5 or 6 weeks, that stuff still wasn't letting up, but needed some normalcy. So finally getting to your question, but going back to work and getting a chance to be able to take care of kids and be around a patient population that I really connected to, a place where my life had some meaning. I understood who I was at work. Right. There's some familiarity there. So that was really important for me.
Yes. Yeah. And just speaking as one healthcare provider to another, we learn how to compartmentalize very well. And in the field that you're in the neonatal intensive care unit, there's a lot of there can be a lot of sadness there, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, that sort of thing. But when we are done with our jobs and we turn to face our families and our children, we have to leave that where it was, at the hospital, at the clinic, and be able to function in the rest of our lives in a way that whatever trauma we've gone through at work doesn't negatively affect our lives at home and with our families. I know with my family, 99.9% of the time would never tell them any of the stories that I'd heard throughout my career, because I didn't want to traumatize them, and I had to be able to put on a happy face and leave that behind. So I would imagine that now you not only are compartmentalizing what's going on at work, but also your grief, so that you can be present for your two little girls at home and for your wife.
Right. And the compartmentalization, it used to be kind of just more in one direction. I didn't want my work life to affect my home life. And of course, you don't want to bring your home life into your work life either. But with something like this, it was impossible because, in working at the hospital or in healthcare and stuff, you're working with people who are just naturally compassionate people that like taking care of people. So there's just a tremendous amount of attention, and it felt like just everybody was always like, is he okay? Is he okay? Is he okay? So there's the sense of me trying to convince people to not worry about me, which is a weird sense of disconnection from myself, because I needed to be worried about. I should have been more worried about myself. Then there was this threat. I never felt like work would be a place of threat, but now I don't know who listens to Alex Jones. I don't know who buys into this stuff. Am I going to walk into a room and be faced with something like, so there was so much going on. My ability to compartmentalize was challenged and I wasn't very good at it. And I unfortunately spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to compartmentalize better and better and better, which didn't prove to be very successful or helpful for me long term.
Which distanced you from the grief that you needed to feel and move through. And also then you went through really this PTSD response, largely due to the people that were stirred up by Infowars and Alex Jones and his claim that this was a hoax, and the people who were coming after you with death threats. And so in public, you became hyper-vigilant.
Yeah.
And talk about that a little bit and how that affected your time with your family when you'd all be out together.
Right. Yeah. So and thanks you just said something that was really important. I feel like I'm not doing a good job of highlighting, so I'm glad you brought it up. It's just that grief, right?
Yeah. When
we talk about what Alex Jones did and why I can say like what he did was evil, that's not like, it's not a word I just throw around, know, but like he interfered and robbed us of our ability to grieve in a position that was almost always going to be difficult, right? It was already traumatic grief. It was complicated grief. But he came in so quick and so hard and so fast, and his followers did the same thing, that I was constantly faced with this: do I grieve or do I fight?
Right.
And I had no energy to do either, to be honest, but I was always having to try and make that choice. And so yeah, when I'm out in public, and this was all very like kind of subconscious. It wasn't like I set out to do this, but I was just constantly aware of my surroundings. I was constantly aware of who was looking at us. I started choosing parking spots that made sense to get away quickly. And it was just a sense of tension and the sense of like angst, and it never went away. Right. And so whether I was out in public, and the fact that people, for a short time after this shooting, people would recognize us if we were out and about. And so it was hard because you'd have well-meaning people, very loving people, come up and they would cry and they would want to give you a hug.
Right.
But just the fact that people knew who I was.
Yes.
And I was grateful for that. But at the same time, it brought this sense of like, I just got to be careful, because I don't know who I can trust. And I'm usually somebody that just like, I love you and I trust you until you prove otherwise. Right.
Right.
And
Right.
the roles were reversed, which was very unnatural for me. And so
Right.
I just became sinister. I looked at the world from a very dark perspective. And all these things weren't really who I am as a person. And I was just changing and was very unaware of really how much that was happening.
Well, and also then your awareness that your two remaining daughters could be very much in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so balancing that, I'm sure you probably wanted to put them each in their own little bubbles and just keep them at home to protect them. But by the same token, you're having to balance the need to give them as much normalcy as possible.
Mm-hmm. And a big theme for Alyssa and I, so Alyssa and I did have conversations of like, we need to learn how to grieve, right? Our counselor was, and we had this intuitiveness about just, they're, at this point, they're 5 and 3 years old, 5 and 4 years old. And they're going to be looking to us to know how to grieve. And they're going to be watching how we're going to handle these situations. So there was this internal pressure of trying to make sure we did it right. And how do you do something right that you don't know anything about? So, so that was always like, I always wanted to focus on that. And we had moments where we could, and that was when we were at home and when we were together, and we had this sense of like the Parker 5, like, like we're together, like we're still a family. Like didn't even mean to say it like that. Of course we're a family and we're a whole family, and and we're here for each other. So there was a sense of that. So taking that, I'm now aware of what one person is capable of doing to another. That person had no reason. He didn't know who Emily was. He didn't know who I was. He didn't hate us. Now, even though a lot of these things were online that were coming at us from conspiracy theorists, I know what somebody is willing to do. And so they weren't frivolous threats. And knowing that there's millions of people in the country that subscribe to this, I knew that there's people in the community that subscribe to this. So there's just this sense of threat all the time. And, you talk about a trauma response, and from earlier in life trauma responses, like I was just primed and wired to just respond in this way where I just was hyper vigilant. I was not trusting. I wanted to focus and grieve, but I couldn't. Constantly feeling like I was being re-victimized, and just really awful pattern.
Absolutely. And yeah, I want to get to that, because there's so much more to the story that you begin to discover about yourself. But prior to that, you are contacted by someone who you didn't expect to have contact with. And that was the father of Adam Lanza, Peter Lanza.
Yeah, that was a bizarre, it was kind of like through this acquaintance of a professional acquaintance. But in that press conference, one of the things I was trying to embody who Emily was, and talking about how Emily would be there supporting people if she wasn't killed. And Alyssa and I had talked, like, we couldn't imagine to be the parent of whoever did this, like how hard that must be for them. And that was something that I had mentioned in that press conference. And the shooter's father, Peter, he heard that, and he felt like that was an extension of an olive branch. Felt like that was when he talked to somebody and said, like, that's really the only person that I felt like has tried to understand what it's like to be in my shoes. And so he had mentioned to somebody in passing, like, if they were ever willing to talk, I would be willing to talk. And so that made it back to us. And so we had this decision if that's something that we really wanted to do, or if we wanted to follow through with that, and how that would, be beneficial for our grieving process or not. And we decided to end up talking with him.
Yes. And he, as it turned out, was nearly as mystified as you all were about what caused his son to do this. He had been estranged from his son for a couple of years, right?
Yeah. There had been a divorce, and there were 2 sons. And everything that I'd learned Peter had done what he could to be, he was very supportive, financially supportive of the boys. He was, he tried to be a part of their lives. And his son, Adam, who was the shooter, he really struggled with a lot of mental health issues that we don't fully really understand or grasp.
Right.
But at that point, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to Peter too was, there's obviously a ton of questions that we knew we weren't going to get answers to, but if anybody had them, it was him. Adam had killed his mom, he killed himself.
Yes.
And so those two primary people were gone. And so we wanted to encourage Peter to release any records, just be forthcoming and right. give us anything or anything like that. And I was really happy to learn that that's what his intention was and what he was out to. He had a lot of the same questions that we did, because he didn't know his son as well as he would have liked to, and wanted to understand that more. So,
was there anything revealed in medical records of Adam's that would elucidate what led to this?
I mean, the biggest thing that I took away from anything that I read or learned about was just the cracks in the system that we have.
Right.
And so there were opportunities where he was getting help and he was seeking help, but because of his age, going from one system to another, and then not being able to get some resources that were probably appropriate for him, and then his spiral, and then how his mom, reportedly, right? It's not like I've ever talked to her. This is all reportedly, but her response to approach Adam and his mental health crises just obviously weren't adequate. And so
right.
There's just, when I learn about and seeing anything from those reports, I wasn't mad at the mom, I wasn't mad at Peter, and I wasn't mad at Adam. I was really upset with the system
yes.
for really failing. And that's something that we see over and over again.
Well, as a psychiatrist, I can fully support that sentiment that the system is not just cracked, but seems to be crumbling.
Right.
It's very tragic. So you talk in the book about starting your own road to healing. You got into therapy and you had to start facing some things that occurred long before this tragedy.
Right. Yeah. So this was my first time doing any sort of legitimate real therapy, on an ongoing basis. And it was neat in the sense that it was working. I was engaged. I had, I'll get to it in a second, but when I did try to deal with previous trauma in my life, that was just really hard and I just didn't want to go there.
Right.
So I had a choice to not go there at the time, and I didn't. And this one, I felt like there wasn't a choice. I had to do this for myself. I understood that it was important for me and for my girls. And I was engaged, and the tools that we talked about, the things that I was able to express and learn were working. I could see how it played out at home. Tons of mistakes and learning from tons of mistakes, but working on this on an individual level and on a family level, it was really kind of a beautiful process. And I was encouraged by where I felt a sense of we can do this, right? This is going to be hard and everything, but we can do this. And there were some wins, the ratio of misses and hits were all over the place. But I was feeling when I would go to counseling, I wanted to go and talk about it. And then all of a sudden it was this door slammed, and I always talk about, because Emily talked like this too, but just there was light starting to come back in my world. I was starting to experience color and this warmth and glow and light and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden everything stopped. Everything went back into grayscale. I didn't feel like I didn't want to progress. I didn't feel like I could progress. Things that I had learned in therapy and started trying to use, they weren't working. And I was just really confused by all this. And talking to my counselor, this had gone on for a couple months, and she just this was going on internally for a little while. By the time I got to a point where I could really articulate what was going on, she just was very thoughtful and was like, is there something from your past that needs to be addressed that hasn't been addressed. And it took me back to being sexually abused by my I grew up in the Mormon religion, and my Mormon bishop had sexually abused me and at least 3 other boys. My sister had also been sexually assaulted. And so there's just my family was a family that had been through a lot of trauma, but also didn't ever deal with that.
Didn't address it. Yeah.
No. And then even when I first came out and told my story, when all of that information started to come into the light, people didn't believe us. We were attacked. So as like a 6-7-year-old boy telling the truth and then being told, and then seeing the community that I grew up in turn on us, just left a lot of stuff to work on. And I never dealt with it. I wanted to prove to the world that this wasn't going to affect me. And I try to live the most happy and successful, positive life I could. And that worked to get me through childhood. Right. So it was just this amazing experience where all that starts to come up in counseling, and I'm really like paraphrasing a lot of work here, but it was beautiful in the sense of like, here I am trying to work through the death of my 6-year-old daughter.
Right.
And in the process of losing her, it's like Emily was able to connect me back to my 6-year-old self.
Right.
Like reintroduced me to a boy that had been hurt and that wasn't healing and needing to find healing there. And so I love that, years after she died, was still able to give and to show me who she was. And so,
yeah, that's really, Emily continues to show up in a lot of ways for you all, but that's really significant. And in my work with victims of childhood sexual trauma, particularly, it often gets kind of put away in Pandora's box. And the key that inadvertently unlocks that box is when their own children reach the age they were when they were abused. And then they're looking at their own children and understanding how innocent they are and how utterly and completely not to blame for any of it. But from the eyes of a 6-year-old, children always believe that they're the ones to blame for what's happened. And children always carry the shame that should belong only to the perpetrator.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then that being my coping strategy when I was young, now I can look back in hindsight and see that pattern repeat itself and how I responded to Alex Jones and everything else. So. Right.
You talked about trying to always, your coping strategy was outwit, and outrun whatever it was that you didn't want to look at.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Then there comes the time where the Sandy Hook parents begin to file some lawsuits against Alex Jones. I think also filed, they sued Remington, maker of the gun that was used.
So the Remington lawsuit happened pretty quickly after the shooting, and some families joined that, some didn't. I did not join the Remington suit, but that was filed in like 2013.
Okay.
And then with the conspiracy stuff, you just kind of I just wanted to treat him like a bully and just thought if I ignore him, he's going to go away.
Right.
And I just wanted it to just die down, and it just never did. And it just kept getting resurrected when new tragedies and new shootings happened. So it wasn't until 2018 that defamation lawsuits were filed against Alex Jones. And so it had been a long time. He had a long time to do better. And he wasn't, and it wasn't getting better. And now there were not just Sandy Hook families, there was a myriad of other families that were now getting caught up in the same pattern and same cycle that we were getting into.
Right. So, he was making a lot of money off of it.
this isn't an exaggeration. It was tens and tens of millions of dollars a year. And so
unbelievable.
Yeah. And so he has an ability he owns the drama triangle. I can say that.
Yes.
He has a monopoly on the drama triangle, and he uses that for profit.
It's really sickening. At some point, you and your family decide to take a trip back to the Pacific Northwest. Tell us about that.
We didn't have very many roots in Connecticut. Like I said, my brother lived there and Alyssa's cousin lived there. But my brother was just there for school and he moved there because we were there. And so, but we had, I had gone to PA school in Oregon and we loved that area. And my youngest daughter, Samantha, was born there. So it was a place full of just wonderful memories of our entire family. One of my really good friends from PA school was getting married that summer. So the summer after the shooting. So the summer of 2013. And it was just a wonderful reprieve. Like I wanted to get out of Sandy Hook. I needed to get out of there. And he was getting married in like Puget Sound. And so like beautiful, wonderful place to be. And so it was a good opportunity for our family to go back and take this vacation and be with some friends and be in a familiar area. Yeah.
And you talked about, you were wondering what it would be like to be back there, but without Emily. And what did you find?
I was scared. I was really fearful of that. Because now everything was tainted, right? Like everything, every memory, everywhere you'd been now has this evil part to it. And it's horrible. Right. And so that's what I was afraid of. Like this place still felt untouched and isolated from grief. And so I was worried about going back there and if we were going to bring that with us. And fortunately, it didn't follow us immediately. We were there with the girls. We were going by these places that they remembered, that they could get excited about. They were coming up with their own memories of Emily, not coming up with them, but they were remembering their own memories of Emily. Yes. And so that invited Emily to be present with us. And it was like our family felt whole. And being back in this familiar place, it was just so different from what I had been experiencing. And it just was able to do a lot for it. Really just changed the whole trajectory of my life story, my family's life story from then on, from that point.
You talked about the color coming back into your life, how you started to notice the colors around you there in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something you want me to share in detail, but yeah, it was having Emily kind of be with me is what it felt like. And like I said, like at that point, my world had been very gray. I was really stuck. I had really bad social anxiety. So I was around all these groups of people for this wedding party and everything. And just had this moment where I just realized I was 3,000 miles away from Sandy Hook, but I was still feeling all that weight. And there's just this moment where I realized I didn't have to carry that, and physically, literally lifted my head up. And it felt like that was the first time I had actually lifted my head up to see the world in months. Right. And what I saw was gorgeous. And that experience, that's, I talk about it in more detail in the book. Like I said, it really opened something up in me and started a trajectory to finally feel a boost in my healing, for sure.
I believe it was after that trip, your work schedule changed back in Connecticut. Is that correct?
They tried to.
Yeah. But, you were having nothing of that.
I let them know how I felt. I mean, so one of the perks about the job in Connecticut, like I said, we didn't have roots there. Like, we didn't know anybody there, but we had just gone through this period of life where I'd been working full time. I was going to school full time. I just got through this master's program. We had 3 kids. One of them, Samantha, was born in the middle of the master's program. So we were busy and sacrificing a lot. And so taking this job in Connecticut, they offered these 24-hour shifts, which sounds insane. But what I liked about it was that meant I could work 2 days a week. Right. And so I found this way that I got to spend more time with my kids than other people's kids.
Mm-hmm,
And in
mm-hmm.
the NICU, that's hard to come by. And so those 24-hour shifts were really precious to me. It allowed me to do the job that I loved, support the family that I loved, and also get to be with the family that I loved. And so I had a good balance of everything that I had worked so hard for.
Right.
And
Right.
then, the company I worked for at the time, not the hospital I worked at, but I was contracted through this company, and they wanted to make a schedule modification and take away my 24-hour shifts. And no, that I got really, really angry. And one of the good things about grief that wasn't obvious, but it made me lose my filter. So it was the first time in my life where I actually expressed what I felt.
Right.
Unfortunately, that usually had to deal with when I was angry.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully the anger was expressed at everybody outside of my family. But
Good.
yeah,
Yes.
but yeah,
Right. But I think you're right that especially in your situation with your background, being able to externalize anger rather than suppressing it was part of your overall lifetime healing process. And I'm sure you're still we're all still in the process of healing, no matter how long we live.
right.
But
And anger gets a bad rap, and
yeah,
it's one of the things I write about, and I like to talk about it. Is it's a beautiful emotion, and
mm-hmm.
we don't need to be scared of it, and we don't need to suppress it. We definitely need to learn how to work with it.
Yes.
And but it can teach us a lot, and that's what I appreciate about the grief process, is how much it's taught me about a lot of things. And one is that anger can actually be very useful and a very good ally, and I've changed my tune on how I used to approach and look at anger.
It's really something that you can say, that you appreciate the grief process.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming a long way through the grief process to be able to say that. You began developing a relationship with some of the other parents that you hadn't before. Was that after you moved back to Oregon?
Yeah, so we moved back just a little over a year after the shooting. So I got to know some parents in that year time frame. Again, we were really new to the community, so we didn't know anybody before the shooting. So the parents were people that I got to they're the only one that got it, right? And
right.
so I got to know them through meetings that we would attend, and we would hang out sometimes. And there was a grief group that kind of got started. And so I had a connection with them, but we left really quickly afterwards. And I might be jumping a little bit ahead, but like that was one thing about when we finally got to the trial with Alex Jones. One of the things that experience gave me was an opportunity to spend a lot of time with these families and really get to know who they were, and not just their story through their child that was killed just like mine, right? And so getting a chance to spend with the families and get to know them was what a precious gift that was.
Yes, I was going to say precious. Yes. Right. And you spoke about, kind of moving toward what made you decide to, the lawsuit had begun before you made the decision to join. Initially, you didn't want to be a part of it. Can you say a little bit about that? What made you decide, first of all, no, we don't want to be a part of this, and then what caused you to change your mind?
Yeah, I mean, at that time in my life, I was basing so many of my decisions based off of fear. I didn't want to do anything to rile up conspiracy theorists. They were still after us. They were still finding me no matter what I did.
Right.
I didn't want to be looked at or perceived. One of the things the conspiracy theorists talked about was how much money I was making off the government. So the idea of me joining a lawsuit where you're suing somebody for money, that wasn't appealing. I just didn't know if I had the energy to deal with it. We were living on the other side of the country. We were trying to give our girls as an anonymous life as we could, so they could develop just who they were on their own. I wasn't running away from Sandy Hook, but I wanted anonymity. So all these things felt threatened with the idea of joining a lawsuit. I didn't want to be sue happy. We have this thing in American culture where people don't understand that in certain situations, that's the only outlet you have to seek justice.
Right.
And so those reasons were reasons that I didn't want to join. And when it was presented to me if I wanted to join or not, that was something Alyssa and I came to pretty quickly. Like, no, that's not us. That's not what I want to do. I just want to keep my head down and just plow through this.
Right. So, you wanted to create that bubble around yourself and your family. And that was hard to do. I remember in the book you spoke of when you all went to Seattle for, Alyssa created an art program in memory of Emily, correct?
Right. Yeah. So there was 2 nonprofits that we helped start after. One of them was Alyssa and another Sandy Hook mom started Safe and Sound Schools,
yes,
a school safety nonprofit. And then Alyssa and I started something called the Emily Parker Art Connection. And so we just wanted to be able to facilitate children that were suffering from trauma, abuse, or neglect with art therapy, because that was something that Emily expressed her life and what she saw in the world through her art.
So beautiful.
So there was another nonprofit up in Seattle called Art with Heart. And we had done some work together with them. And they were going to do their big fundraising gala, and they were inviting us to be part of their fundraising gala. And it just sounded like just a great opportunity to get out of town for a little bit, take the girls, stay in a hotel, have some fun, and help this wonderful group with their cause and raise some money for them.
And you ended up being terrorized on the street there.
Yeah. I won't get into all the graphic detail that happened, but it was, again, this was now I want to say like 4 years after Sandy Hook. I'm on the other side of the country, and I'm just walking down. I'd gone and parked the car, walking down the street in Seattle, the most random place to be at the most random time, like whatever. Like my best friend could have walked by me, and if I didn't know he was there, I wouldn't have noticed him. Right. And this guy, the
hyper-vigilance was calmed down in that situation.
It was starting to wane. Yeah. Some time and some healing and stuff had started. It was never, it was never gone, but it was waning a bit. And this guy makes eye contact with me, and I hadn't been recognized for a long time, and he starts to say something about like, didn't you have like a daughter that was killed or something? And so I reached out my hand to him to say like, yeah, my daughter Emily was killed at Sandy Hook. Because when that had happened before, people they wanted to express some condolences. And lo and behold, this was a conspiracy theorist. He recognized me like very easily, like right off the bat. He knew my story. He knew who I was. And he started spewing a lot of his conspiracy theory stuff at me. He was really angry. He had a lot of choice words for me. And this was the first time I was confronted face to face with somebody. And
oh my goodness.
You read what we read, and the things that how they described what they wanted to do to me, the things that they called Emily, the things they called my wife, all of those are so horrific. But there's that separation, right, between you and that person.
Right.
And in this moment, not only was I hearing it,
you're face to face.
I was absorbing the hatred that he had for who he believed that I was. And this was really the only chance I ever had to talk back. And so that was one of the catalysts of events that happened that got me to consider joining the lawsuit.
Right.
Was one, remembering that, because the lawsuits were filed later, but recalling that event and knowing that, like, because I was starting to feel like I don't have to be as hyper vigilant, and that experience then took all that away and made it worse.
Shattered that. Once you made the decision to join in the lawsuit, you spoke about the admiration you had for not only the other parents, but for your legal team. They sound like really extraordinary lawyers.
Lawyers, yes. Brilliant, awesome, legal-minded lawyers that had done wonderful things. This was the same law firm that successfully sued a gun manufacturer in the United States and won. And so so they were fantastic at their job, but as I got to know them and spend time with them, and then especially during the trial, again, just that sense of just love and connection. And they were not doing this because they were going to get anything out of this. They're never going to get anything out of this. Probably none of us are. But the need to stand up and fight for something that they felt was right. And and how they were able to help me go through that process. You know, I talked about some family trauma, and one of the things that I carry with me in adulthood is I'm still kind of always looking for this father figure. And this one lawyer, Chris, he was like my father figure through the trial, and then I find out he's only like a couple years older than me. But he cared, and I saw just not like how hard they worked and how good they were at being lawyers, but just how much they invested themselves into us. And it wasn't about the case, and it wasn't about Alex Jones. It was about us, and it was
about you. Yeah. And as you said, that nobody is seeing any money out of this, because Jones has been pretty successful in skirting around that somehow. Clint Watts. Say something about Clint Watts. You had an aha moment when this former FBI agent who was called in as an expert witness based on his knowledge of conspiracy theorists and how they operate. Can you talk a little bit more to us about what light bulbs went on for you as he was testifying?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about Clinton. Nobody's ever really asked about Clinton. He was, in fact, I had what is in the book is about 10% about what I wrote about Clinton. That's how much I appreciate him and his work. So he was the only expert witness that testified for our side at the trial. And what he did is he is a former FBI agent, and he did a lot of counterterrorism work in the FBI. And since he started a firm that basically what they do is they look at how terrorist groups, like just terrorist groups specifically, but they do other work with other groups, but how they use messaging to essentially kind of brainwash people to accept their message and then bring them into their fold. So, we hear about these people, like young kids that are targeted by Al-Qaeda online, and all of a sudden their parents don't know, and they're off in Afghanistan.
That's the word.
Yeah. So he was able to articulate how that works. And so what we had done with the information that we had gotten, and through his work, he was able to analyze how Alex Jones's messaging and how he goes about his business and make those comparisons that it's no different than groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and how he gets people to believe these things, how he gets them to believe in him.
Right.
And that they are willing to not just believe him, but in the sense, give him lots of money.
Yes.
And also give up, in my opinion, who they are as people.
Right.
Aside from Sandy Hook families and other things, I really believe that Alex Jones's listeners are victims of Alex Jones. They believe in this hate. It turns them into people that I really don't think they are. They definitely weren't born that way.
Yeah.
And their stories about
suspend all reason.
Right. And so so Clint in the trial, I went to the trial pretty feeling like I already knew everything. Like I wasn't going to learn anything new. I just wanted to be there to reclaim myself and my voice. And but as he was breaking this down and showing, so this broadcast on this date, he talked about like the Tuesday after the shooting, Alex Jones was on air saying this, and this is what this means, and this is how, and then I was able to, triangulate Alex Jones saying this on Tuesday, and I got this message on that Tuesday.
Right.
And seeing all those things kind of fall into place.
Right.
And really not that like I had just like wandered into this conspiracy world, but that I was targeted, and just how vile and vicious and calculated it was.
Right.
Don't make the mistake that Alex Jones is a crazy person. It's easy to separate yourself from him with that. He's he's very calculated and he knows what he's doing. He does a very good job of it. And
Absolutely.
Clint was able to express that beautifully to the jury.
Mm-hmm. Most narcissistic sociopaths do know exactly what they're doing and are very adept at manipulating other people. And Alex Jones is adept at that. And their tactics are always to either instill fear or sympathy that they've been victimized, or that the person they're talking to, their audience, is the victim, convince them that they are victims, which is what we still see today going on. It seems to be pervasive in our society.
Yep, absolutely.
You talked about coming to the realization that you'd not just been up against one rattlesnake, but you had walked into a room full of rattlesnakes with Alex Jones and Infowars.
Yeah. And Clint's testimony elevated me to see the bigger picture. Like, I had only seen this from what was happening to me and my family. And what else could I have done in that time frame, right? And so he took me to an elevation where I could see the bigger problem for what it was. And it was a scary moment. I was not expecting to be that impacted at the trial.
Yeah. I think you all waited for Jones to actually show up, and he did on one day, correct? One day of the trial.
He was always outside of the courthouse because that's where the cameras were. So he was always willing to, he was always willing to do his shtick out there. But in court, he did show up for one day of testimony. And there were, I would say, if you were interested in the drama or seeing any fireworks or anything like that, like that was the day where a lot of that was present. And remember, there was two trials and there was two cases. Alex Jones was sued in Texas by some Sandy Hook families, and in Connecticut. The Texas trial was first, and in Texas he was tried to be very compassionate. He tried to be very apologetic. He tried to just play this kind of like bumbling idiot that, like, I just question things. And in our trial, he was pure, authentic Jones, and he had a vendetta against Chris, our lawyer, specifically, and against me. And and so he was on full display of everything that Alex Jones can be in that, on the stand. And so
and he made the statement, I'm done apologizing. Yeah,
and I describe actually another one of those weird moments where I daydreamed about this moment for years, right? About me seeing him in court. And I was shocked by what I felt when I saw him.
What did you feel?
There was just this human moment of, like, he comes in and he's just this, he's extremely overweight. He's not in good health. He's walking with this kind of gimpy limp.
You just know the guy has a lot of sleep apnea.
Right. No, totally. But like, and I was a respiratory therapist before I was a PA. So, but what I saw was just the weight of what it is that he puts on himself and he carries. He lives in this world of being victimized, of hatred, of distrust. And in my interpretation, I saw a lot of pain, and I saw a lot of him. All of his bombasticness is to override whatever it is that he's hiding deep down.
Right.
And I was just really surprised that I felt sympathy for just the life that he's lived. He's a shell of a human being. He has no love in his heart for himself or for other people. And you could see that on display. And that was him off camera, right? And he wasn't doing anything in particular, but I had that moment where I was like, God, he's not very different than me or anybody else that's just trying to work through hard things. He's going about it in a way that's very destructive.
Right.
And that destructiveness is was evident, I guess is what I was trying to say.
And I think you hit the nail on the head when you used the term shell, because narcissists are basically just shells of human beings. They don't have a sense of self or identity, and they're always looking for an image of themselves to be reflected back by the world, whether that's positive or negative. They need something to validate that they actually exist, and that is a very sad way to live. So it's interesting that you picked up on that and that you actually felt some pity for him in that moment.
Yeah, it didn't last long. I'm not trying to, you
Right.
know, knight myself in a sainthood or anything.
Right.
He got up on the stand and he did what he did, and he reminded me exactly who he was and what he had done to us. And so, but yeah.
And then you had a side issue that came up, wanting to prevent photographic images of the crime scene to be leaked out. And you and the other parents went to the Connecticut State Capitol to lobby against that, correct?
Yeah, so that was before we actually moved from Connecticut. The Freedom of Information Act
Right.
is a great thing. It holds press accountable, and and it holds other people that the press can use to be accountable. Like, it's a wonderful, great law. Unfortunately, Connecticut's Freedom of Information Act hadn't been updated much. It was enacted like back in the 70s for the state. It hadn't really been updated in a digital age. And during the investigation about Sandy Hook, they could say this is an ongoing investigation. We don't have to release anything. But there were already hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests for crime scene photos and different things like this. And in that first year, what we had all experienced as a community from the conspiracy theorists, that was the last thing. I was afraid of Madeline getting curious as a 12-year-old girl,
right. Yes.
And Googling her sister's name and seeing these things.
Yes.
And so we were able to, one, get a crash course in the inefficiency of government, but also lobby and really try and help the legislature in Connecticut see things from not just the Sandy Hook family's perspective, because there's, you talk about all these murders and stuff that happen that nobody hears about.
Right.
And the fact that those families needed protection too, to make sure that their loved ones weren't being splattered on a screen for the benefit and enjoyment or monetary gain of somebody else. And so,
right.
So we were able to fight hard for that, and we were able to get the changes made that anybody that petitions, that they have a burden of proof to prove why it's in the
right
in the public's best interest. Yeah.
Right. And good for you all. That was brilliant. I'm so glad that you were able to get that accomplished. Not just for you all, but like you said, for everyone else that might have to face that. The jury deliberated for, what was it, 3 days?
Yeah, and it was over like a 3-day weekend, so it was like almost a whole week. But Alyssa didn't join the lawsuit, and I don't have real time to get into the why behind that. But she's a beautifully strong person. But the lawyers had her testify as to what changes she saw in me during that time.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and I was able to get a moment on the stand where that was the whole point of me there, was realizing throughout this whole time what I'd given up. I thought that Alex Jones had taken a lot of things from me. He definitely had, and he definitely inflicted a lot of pain, but there was things in my own coping mechanisms that I was giving up on my own. And it was in my power to reclaim Emily's memory, who she was as a person, in my own voice and my own power.
Right.
And so getting a chance to do that on the stand was exactly what I came there for. So
exactly. Yes.
And I just wanted to say that because when we get to the jury and their deliberation and their verdict, which was amazing, that was not what I was there for. Their verdict was just a validation of what it is that they saw in all of us.
Yes.
But I got what I came for in my moment up on the stand and being able to walk off the stand, having accomplished that. But
and hearing Alyssa's testimony sort of opened your eyes to some things as well. Like a deeper awareness of what you had been going through as you were busy compartmentalizing and trying to function as a PA and a husband and a father. She was able to testify about the changes she saw in you.
Yeah. And another one of those moments where I didn't think I was going to get any surprises, and she never ceases to amaze me. But learned a lot about myself through seeing me through her eyes that I would never be able to do on my own, for sure.
Yeah. You all have a beautiful marriage, no doubt about that. Tell us about who let the dogs out.
So that's another great Emily story. Emily was a jokester. Like she got to know people. Like I said, she's a great communicator. I know she was 6, and I know people are gonna be like, yeah. But but like, so we taught her baby sign. So she always had a way to express herself and always had a way to express her needs.
Right.
So she was always, before she could talk, she could communicate. And then she also talked early. Like at 10 months old, she was saying her first word. She was speaking sentences by 14 months old, And so she loved to connect with people. She loved inside jokes. And she knew that I hated that song, the Who Let the Dogs Out song. And I just hated it, and she loved it. And so then when she found out I didn't like it, she would surprise me, and she'd be like, "Hey, Dad," and like, "Hey, what's up, Emily?" And then she would just start singing it, and I was like, "Oh." And we took a trip away from Sandy Hook at around the year mark from the shooting, and we were at this restaurant, and all of a sudden that song blares out over the speakers at the restaurant, and like I'm just like so irritated by it, and like Alyssa and the girls are just totally laughing, and then like, so we have this moment, we're like, okay, and then we start talking, the music fades out, and then for whatever reason the music like comes back on again.
Oh my God, the same song.
And it's so annoying, and it's so long when you hate it. And this time, like, I just couldn't help it, and I just started laughing, and the girls were just stunned, like, what? And then when it played for a third time, that was when we had to like recognize Emily's presence, right? And her role in this. And we were there at that dinner. It would have been a year since she had been killed, and trying to just understand where my grief process was at that time. And I'm looking at my 2 beautiful girls and my beautiful wife, and trying to figure out, how are we still going to navigate this? And we had a lot of tough decisions in front of us, and that experience, and I say this, and you can take it however you want, whether you're a spiritual person or not, but like that message from Emily, in my mind, was a way for her to let me know that it was okay to hope again. Yes. And I talked about, I couldn't trust hope after the firehouse. I felt like hope betrayed me. And that moment was when I was able to allow hope to come back in, and move forward in our life in a way that I could carry that with me.
Well, there's so many beautiful things about Emily that I don't know. There's something from my perspective, as I think about her and the way you describe her in your book, and there's something very, very special about her that, her message is still coming through. And I think you talked about an experience with butterflies that Alyssa really interpreted it as, this is Emily coming through with the butterflies. Yeah.
Yep. We're still, the Parker 5. And so we're all still connected, and we incorporate her in our lives as much as possible.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, Robbie, what, in closing, what message would you like to convey to the audience? Are there any take-home sort of messages that you've learned and that you want to pass on?
I mean, there's a lot of things I could talk about. I think the biggest is just like the reason I wrote this book, or the reason I put the book out there, wasn't to promote myself or like really get into all the stuff about my story. It's just my healing process and what it was able to do for me. And and then because of the situation that I've been put in and my job at work, and I see a lot of suffering. And now, as I started to share some of my story with people, and they would share to me what they were suffering from, and I felt like a lot of people, because my story is so out there and it's so bizarre and it's so, you just can't make sense of it, that people feel like they can't. I just hear all the time, like, I can't imagine, right? I can't imagine what this was like for you. What you're going through is nothing like compared to what I'm going through. And I just wanted to share a story in a way that helped you see that, like, you can connect to my story. Like, we are sharing this human experience. And so many of us need healing from the most horrific things that have happened to us. And there's no contest. The hardest thing that's happened to you is the hardest thing that's happened to you.
Right.
And so just understanding, like, what brought me healing was finding my voice, connecting to myself, and then being able to then connect with other people in times that were hard for them. Learning how to listen and learning how to express myself in a way that could be heard has brought me a tremendous amount of healing. And so just for anybody listening, just to open yourself up to that concept and to allow yourself to step over your comfort zone into a place either with somebody else or with yourself that is very scary or very uncomfortable. And you don't need to go too far into it. Just step over the line and sit with it until you realize that you're safe and that there's people that care about you and that your healing journey can begin. And then you can start to share that with people. Like, that's really the message of what I wanted to try and express in the book. And it took a lot of work for me to even get to the point where I wanted to share it with people. And so that would be it.
Your story is such a gift to the world. You talk about connection. If you don't mind, I want to share something,
please,
from the end of your book. In Alyssa's book, An Unseen Angel, that she wrote, she tells the story of Emily calling her into her room, I believe, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, and pointing out the flowers on the wall. And she said, "Do you see these two flowers, Mom? If you look around, you will see there are connections everywhere. Isn't it exciting? Everything's connected."
Yeah. Yeah, there was pink flowers with black centers, and there were black flowers with pink centers. Don't you see it, Mom? They're connected. Yeah. And so, and that's like, that connection to Emily is, hopefully, I'm so glad that you felt that in the book.
Definitely.
It's something that I cherish and that my family holds dear. And that connects me, like I said, like, she helped me connect to my own story that brought healing. And I really hope that anybody that listens to this or reads the book can connect to their own story and connect to your healing journey as well. And that then you can share that in a way that can help other people. So.
Yes, absolutely. Robbie, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm so honored. It's really been a privilege. And I just know that Emily's legacy is going to live on through you and her sisters and someday her nieces and nephews and on and on.
Right.
There will always be that connection.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today as we welcomed Robbie Parker, father of Emily Parker, a 6-year-old girl who was murdered in the Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14th, 2012. His story is so poignant and so important, and an important lesson to all of us about how we're all connected, how we have to be compassionate with ourselves in times of great tragedy, and how we cannot forget that we can reach out for help, and we have a story to tell. If you have a story to tell of overcoming adversity, please reach out to us at info@adversitytoascension.com. And if you like episodes like today's, please like, subscribe, comment, tune into us on YouTube and all the places that you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, and others. So until we see you again, be well and take very good care.
You can be a fighter every single day.